Started. So, I'm going to just go here, fail, or here. Portraits. You have and play. Source sequence and target using a lot, taking the to and then that very nice young woman. This person is controlling her face at this. This bunch of detail about source and target, and we're going to go all this. This paper works. A while back, SIGGRAPH is this generative adversarial network that enforces systems. which basically means that we've taken every one of these images and we've built a 3D model of each one of those images. All right. Now, one of the cool things about this is that this 3D model that we're parameterizing. So what this parameters, and we're going to get into this in a bit, but bear with me. We're just going over the overview here. I'm basically redrawing here. Think about if we had a 3D model of something and we parameterized it, what kind of parameters could you possibly have? Well, first of all, you'd have like the eye location, right? The eye direction. And then maybe the expression. We're going to have controls on the expression that this character can make. So we're going to parameterize the expression that's possible. And then the pose of the head. But then there's also other things like illumination. Remember, illumination can change, illumination. And even identity. All right? And we're going to have exactly the same thing, the target parameters over here. Params are. And we have, I'm going to just go E, or eyes, expression, pose, illum, let's go fast, and ID. There we go. All right. Okay, so this is kind of cool. What they're going to do is in the process of converting the images and the representative 3D representations, they're going to actually solve for these parameters. So these parameters, this 3D thing looks. And they're also going to solve for the exact same thing for the target video that we started with. And we have the target parameters. And now remember, the cool one, realize that the cool thing is that we can, one more time, I'm going to press broadcast. I'm still broadcasting. We're going to press or be able to change the expression of this 3D model by sliding the values of these parameters. This is basically, right? I mean, a blend shape rig. We can gaze, we can control the expression, we can control the pose and illumination and identity. By messing in this list, plus or minus some, I'm going to be working with.
So does that mean like for eyes you have a single float, or you have three floats?
Yes, 3 floats for eyes. 3 floats for eyes. Good question. It isn't just one direction. They actually have a 3D vector that the eyes are pointing.
An expression could be even more complex, and pose.
Yeah, I think expression is on 30 or 40 values. We'll read off that in a bit. Okay. Now, one cool thing. None of this is done with machine learning yet. And you're thinking, Doug, why are we even talking about this? Why, have you betrayed me? There's no machine learning in this paper. Now comes the machine learning. The cool thing is, remember, we want to take the performance of the source actor and put it on the target actor. Well, what we could do is take the pose of the source and apply it to the model of the target. So we have this thing that when we put in these 90 parameters produces a mesh that looks like our guy. And actually with the illumination ID, it actually renders like our guy. So what we're going to do is squish these things together. We're going to take the eye expression and pose of this and put this here, and take the illumination and ID of this and put this here. Right? That's kind of cool. And out of this, we have the ability to use a GPU to render an image of our guy. Right? So notice I put hair on this. We're actually rendering the target of our guy, but it would be with the pose of the source guy. Now, unfortunately, this looks like a render. This does not look, this is not going to fool anybody. This is not reanimating that pose. That's where machine learning comes into play. Because this is going to be input into our rendering to video translation network. And I'm sort of going to compress this a little bit. Don't worry, we're going to get it bigger. So they have a rendering thing to me. Image in that's been rendered, and I'm skipping something here, but I'm going to save it as a surprise later. We're gonna take basically the rendering of this image, stick it into this, and out will pop the 256 by 2. And one of the cool things here is that this thing is hearing about this of our guys' fate. Signs that I'm trying to that is want to draw. That is just a version. The background is black. Everything about this is just the face. But this rendering to video thing is actually going to put the hair in the background. Again, totally different. It's a different architecture. So, right? So I've kind of conflated things about how this runs and how it's also trained. Initially, you train it with a batch of images and a batch of images. You convert it into here, and we'll use that to train stuff. But then when it runs, you just take a source image. You don't even need the target image because the target image has been built in. We figured that out. We take the source image, it's running. It actually can solve this monocular reconstruction in pretty rapidly. It's much less than a second. And then we can animate our character. We can render this on the GPU very rapidly and produce an image of our target guy CG rendered. And then that gets fed into this make it look pretty rendering to video translator, and out spits our original model. So the clever thing about, this part here is kind of like that CycleGAN stuff that we were talking about, where it took Doug into Joe. But in this case, look at all this stuff is actually converted, relying on the CycleGAN to do everything. Let's actually do stuff that we can actually do without using machine learning, where we actually figure out all the poses. So now, instead of taking Doug into Joe, what we're going to do is take digital Joe into Joe. And that becomes a much easier problem for the machine learning to get a grasp on, right? So I love this paper because it was such a neat thing where they were looking at what's hard about machine learning and what we can do with kind of computer visioning problems, and then taking the stuff that machine learning can do, which is taking the CG rendering, converting it into something beautiful, and letting it run with that. So we only have the machine learning part of it doing what it's really good at. This makes sense. This is this is like so now we're going to go into some of the details, and we're going to spend most of this time, however much time we have left here, talking mostly about this. We're gonna see how they do this because this is interesting to me. I want to figure out how they put this all together, and then if we have time, we'll talk a little. But maybe we'll save that for the next talk because that also goes into another paper that I want to talk about. This may be chopped. So I'm going to erase all this, memorize it quick. So we're going to start with how do these guys go? And then again, this is this paper called Face-to-Face, Real-Time Face Capture and Reenactment of RGB Videos. And the author list is similar, but not exactly the same. The same list. That is the paper that you should start to begin the control. First of all, V tools also aren't entities, right? Some math. So we got P equals P star F 1 through N sub star. This is let P in parameter sequence that fully describes facial performances. So this is, notice that this is fully describes both the source and the facial performance. Which, even though these numbers aren't the same, I'm not exactly sure exactly what that thing is. I think it might be a combined thing of those two where they overlap, or I'm not sure. Okay, now the set of rigors encode the rigid head pose. So here we go. We got rigid head pose, R star, as an element of SO3. So what? Well, we're now going exactly is the parameters. And one of the things in the parameters is a rotation matrix, right? So how the head is actually rotated, this little SO3 is just a rotation matrix. So it's basically a representation of 9 numbers that represent a rotation. So we got 3 values, that 9 numbers, and you can actually compress this down. You don't actually store the 9 numbers because rotation matrices are symmetric, and you don't have to store it. Think about it that way. There's also translation. This one's easy. That is an element of R3. Right? Sure. Yeah. So you have 3 real numbers that represent the translation of the head. So that's the pose. The facial identity. So this is the pose of the head. Identity is represented and star, and that is an element of R n to the alpha. So we're going to have a certain number of parameters here that are all real numbers that represent something that we can use to control the identity of our 3D character that we're creating. And, oh, this is the geometry. And then also, this is geometry. Reflectance is beta star element and right R and E. Okay. So the facial identity coefficients. I'm wondering where. Bear with me. That's way more than I thought it would be. The later on we get down to 90. So we'll figure out why that happens. It kind of slipped past me there. So they have 80 parameters. How the geometry can change for an identity, and then 80 parameters to represent how the reflectance of this character can change. Okay, so far so good. And then expression parameters. Expression. Parameters are, they call that, oh, yeah, what is that, lowercase or something? And here, 64 values here. And then finally that, we'll go gaze direction for both eyes, element 27. Yeah, sorry, R4. And then I'm going to squish it in here because I want to stay. I'm going to do illuminate. That's a lowercase gamma, I think. R27. And the spherical partitions. Okay, so all told, there are 261 parameters per video frame. I must have lied about the 90th. I think actually that's the 90 that I took from there. So this is 261 parameters per video frame. So obviously I was rambling on that. Let's take a look at here. We've got something. First, reduce geometry. And we're going to shortly is 80 blend shape weights that can then create a 3D mesh for us that represents the geometry of our character. That is just to produce the shape of the person. Then on top of that, we have more blend shapes. We have weights that we can use to control the expression. No, the 64 blend shape weights that we can control the expression. And we have 80 parameters that we can use to blend textures together to get the reflectance. So all of these things are just going to be used to linearly combine some sort of representation of faces that we've already created. Finally, we have a gaze parameter. There are 4 values in here which represent a quaternion and switch seconds for each of that back. And then the illumination here is how our character is actually being illuminated. And so they have 27 parameters that represent the incoming light onto our character, and that is being represented using a spherical harmonic basis to represent sort of the global environment. Now, one very cool, or one thing to notice, that this is a very diffuse model. The lighting here is not going to capture point light sources. We're not going to get any specular highlighting or anything from this. This is just basically saying the lighting is coming from over there, or maybe there's a light over there and a light over here, but we can represent that. But you know, having just 27 values, it's not going to get you a high dynamic range lighting environment. This is just going to get you basically the light in the environment at that time. And then these two guys are how the head is pointing and where it is in space. So if we think about this, we have something that'll produce a digital character with triangles and stuff like that. This is a digital character. We have a camera that is fixed. We assume the camera never moves. The only thing that moves in this case is the head. So we have rotation and translation that specify how this head is in space. Or whatever this is, that guy. The expression, and then we have beta, the illumination that represents how light is off this guy's face. And then finally, a couple of things that tell us how the eyes move, right? And with this, we can create any face in any expression on the planet, or at least that's their supposition, right? And this is important because we're the same model for the source video sequence and the target video sequence. Of course, the values will change, but the source video sequence is going to have a set of 261 parameters that represent Doug, and the target sequence is going to have 261 parameters that represent Joe. And so the cool thing is we can mix and match these things. We could take entry and expression and swap them with all the other parameters for Joe, and we would have Joe doing what Doug is doing. We can even leave the pose of Joe the same. And so all you're doing is seeing Doug in the same pose as Joe was with Doug's expression. We could even just take and use Joe's performance to move Doug's face. It's mix and match and swap things all over the place. All right, so far so good. Now, hopefully the mathematician, wait, what? 200 parameters in this highly nonlinear thing? How the hell are you going to solve this? Bear with me. We're going to get there. All right. So let's look at the parametric face representation. So let's just look at the face. We're going to switch over to color here. All right. This is based on a parametric head model. It's called 3D morphable models. This is something that you'll see. So 3D morphable models from way back when, Blands and Better at 1999. All right, so we have a piece of geometry. Geometry has V equals R 3N. So these guys are the vectors, or the vertices of the piece of geometry that we've got. Every one of our faces has the exact same topology. It has the same number of vertices connected up in the same way. The way they differ is because they've changed in space, right? So we can say that the vertices for our character are going to look like this. Take the alpha and the delta. It's delta, right?
That looks like a delta.
It kind of looks like a delta. That's a lowercase delta. Equals a geo. So basic, the basic average face plus summation of blend shapes, right? A equals 1 n alpha. And then here we have alpha k plus e k geo.
So these are Ask7, but anything in any way altered to fit the person. They're just a generic face, and all the blend shapes include things like weight and nose size and things like that.
Exactly, exactly. So where this is coming from is the guys who originally created this scanned a ton of people. They scanned, I'm not even sure how many people they went into it, but it's a lot of people. And they went through and took each one of those scans and put the same mesh on each one of those characters. So think about what you've got. You've got a mesh of Doug, and a mesh of Joe, and a mesh of Sally, and a mesh of whoever. They all have the vertices on the same spot on their face. So I could take each one of those meshes, say have the same number of vertices, treat them as a big vector, and average them. And I would get the average face of everyone I scan, average face that I just download from the internet. But then I also have BKs, which are Doug from the average face. So how, if I have all these, here's the average face, and here's Doug, here's Joe, and here's Sally. I could basically say, I'm going to take each one of these guys and subtract the average face. So I get this big long list of delta vectors that take the average face and move a different person. So I can then take that thing and I can do a principal component analysis where I don't want to have Doug and Joe, who might look a lot like each other, be separate things. I want shapes, these delta vectors that represent differences. I want these things to be orthogonal to each other. So I'm going to take all these deltas and I'm just going to analyze them a bit and come up with a set of blend shapes that can basically take the average face and turn it into somebody with a ever-increasing nose size, or the width of the face changes, or the eyes start separating, or all this kind of thing, whatever the PCA teases out of this data in order to create a person. So Doug might have a set of weights that like each and every one shape Doug. And Joe will have a set of weights that you use to multiply each and every one of those PCA weights to get to Joe. And that's what we're counting on, is that we can take these PCA-based shapes, or deltas, and by carefully weighting them correctly, I can produce any outliers. They're going to be that weren't scanned. They're going to won't actually be able to capture on this. But if their database of faces was wide enough, you really should be able to represent a good chunk of the population of the planet with this. And the same thing goes with expressions. So once we've got that, we have EK expression. So this takes our face, does some stuff to make it look like the person we want it to look like, and then we have more deltas that can change that face so that it approaches the appropriate expression. Now, the one thing, and I have to go back and look at the paper and everything, but there's a sort of an assumption here, right? That this is all a linear combination. Face, average face. It can take us, that average face, into a specific identity. And then this thing, I just like looked at that and I was like, does this actually work? Because we're kind of layering, and remember, these are all deltas. We're layering these deltas to produce expressions. So does Doug make the same expression the same way as Joe does? Is my question. So here if we stop right here, we've created an average face taken to Doug. Diagram, and it's a combination of that were PCA and analyzed from all the expressions that they scan. If I raise my right eyebrow and solving raises, it's going to be the same. Think it out of these deltas, even though I might raise my right eyebrow slightly different than Joe does, we're going to be solving for these things. the one question I have with this paper is, we had an assumption that we could take the parameters that we solved for Doug and swap them with Joe. Is that valid? And does it have to be valid? Because remember, after we do all this, we're still going to throw it into our make everything pretty neural network. And so is it close enough so that when I have to decide, once we get to the end, I need to observe what an answer about different size heads is correct. It was enormous heads. It was something that just saw this. It was like,
how do you scale effects like this? Like if you have a kid to an adult or vice versa, would that, I was thinking of polar express.
That's right.
Express,
yeah.
You know, blend shapes, are they normal? I thought
no, this is a great question. I don't know the answer to this. Good. They do a little bit of the standard deviation of the valid parameter. Normally, they don't have parameter, and they have them that we're going to get to. That says parameters scale weights up to 100 because it just makes the solver happy. We don't want that. We want these values to all stay positive one. I think there is a sort of this, but you might some in there by changing it. But then, if I have this to compensate for a small-headed person, and again, raising the eyebrow on me, my eyebrow travels a certain distance. There's knowledge transfer between this. This doesn't say, hey, you're dealing with a small-headed person. Make sure you reduce the size because Doug's eyebrow goes up and down a lot. But on a kid, that eyebrow might not travel as much. Not sure.
But I guess you see the error when the source goes to respose, and then you see the target wouldn't be really natural respose. Might be slightly, but it might not appear like it might feel natural when you look at the video.
Very good point. Yeah. Because the respose should have zero guessing, zeros for all of this, right? And so that's built into the geometry translation would be in this part only. All right. So this reflectance. Is done with this. Our that one. Alpha textures. So this is actually going to produce a diffuse skin reflectance is modeled similarly by a second affine model that stacks the diffuse per vertex albedo. I'm sorry. So the number of things that are coming out of here is the same as that. And so there is an albedo associated with this, basically, color, how light bounces off this thing. And so while this is a big long list of 3D points locations, this is a big long list of colors. Color has a quotes around it. Beta, ref, K. Basically the same thing. You have average reflectance of each and every vertex of a person's face, and you read in person on the panel, basically the scans that they originally got. So pretty cool. All right.
So same here, they have a database of like skin textures and
Yeah.
of all type of people.
Yeah. When they did the scan, they did easily over 100 people with this scan back in 1999. And then they also took high resolution photographs at the same time and computed the diffuse model of the colors. So this is not an image at this point, it's just colors.
What's the resolution of this mask?
The resolution of the mask is a great question. Oh, it's 200 high quality face scans. So it was 200, not 100. And how big is the mask?
You don't kill too much time.
Yeah, I wish I knew, and I could pop this out and somebody else answer to that. It's decent.
The correct number is probably the answer.
Yeah. Well, it says an affine model VR3N stacks per vertex deformations of the underlying template mesh with n vertices. But n must be defined somewhere in here. I just don't see it right away. Yeah. All right. It's decent though. It's not 200. It's not. All right. Now, the cool thing about this, one neat thing is okay, they built the geometry and the reflectance, and as computer graphics people, we're all cool with this. But they don't then assume render man. What they basically say is, yeah, I want this to be a full perspective camera, simple space 3D, simple rendering models. We don't render key points onto the image plane. So basically, we're going to create our own renderer here. So they have a thing that does, so to render, we have something that takes the 3D point so people's arc sample 2D pixel values. And this is the perspective mapping per perspective. And it takes the rotation and translation of the head into account. So this thing has the R and everything associated with it. We assume a fixed camera and identical camera for all the scenes. So we assume that the camera's lens parameters are basically the same. You know, again, they're not being super analytical at this point because they have a machine learning thing that's going to eventually come in and save the day. All right, based on distant illumination assumptions, we use a spherical harmonic basis function, YB. So there is a YB, which takes R3 into R, which to approximate the is read that there is a spherical harmonic model for the incoming radiance of the face, which their little teeny renderer can use to determine the color of the pixel. It's interesting here. The number of the B is the number of spherical harmonic bands, and YB is the spherical harmonic coefficients. So these guys are that. For diffuse materials, an average approximation error below 1% is achieved with only 3 bands, independent of the illumination. And so this results in B squared parameters per color channel. So the reason they got equals 9 parameters per color channel. So the reason that the illumination was modeled with 27 values in 3 spherical harmonic bands. And remember, spherical harmonics is super simple, right? I mean, well, it's like super simple, but you have a sphere, which is your average thing, and then you have 3D lobe, and then you have a more complicated one that's weird things. I don't remember exactly what it looks like, but you can add these things together in order to get a 3D environment map that represents the radiance from that direction. And these things, super complicated. It usually takes a lot of spherical harmonics to model a real world lighting environment. Here, which is based on, yeah, there's a light over there, there's a light over there, and that's about it. So they're fine with that. And we will be too. Okay, so finally, we employ a dense data parallel face reconstruction approach to efficiently compute these parameters. Because remember, we don't know what any of these values, 161 of those values, they're all, what? How do we figure this out? This was the thing that was an enter. To how they plus energy of landmarks plus W regularization energy.
Okay, don't remove the background.
So they're only looking at this one. Hold on, great idea, but think about what they're doing. So to make this easy, first of all, what is this? Well, I've got an image, and this is a real image of me. So here, and smiling, here's my ears. And we've talked about some of this stuff before. There are papers out there that will find with really good, pretty much robustness. Around 67, the paper I like, finds 67 landmarks on the nose, the bottom, they go, and it doesn't matter what the pose of this character is. This is a machine learning thing that they just one of the better ones that finds 7 landmarks on the right. So this is a 2D location. The cool thing is that this thing finds those 6, and it's really good at finding those on your face. Corner of the eyes, the tip of the nose, the corner of the eye. So it finds all these points really accurately. Well, we know where those guys should be because we built this mesh, right? So we know where those points on the face should project onto the image. So this thing says, how close are the landmarks of the rendered image to the actual image score? So then, now we have, let's use those landmarks to get the face close. And then once the face is close, we know what the color of each one of the vertices on the mesh should be on the image, where each vertex projects on the image. Figure out what the color is on the image and compare the the pixel values. So they're not looking at background. Well, they might be looking at background, but that's at the beginning when the face is misaligned. It's not in the right spot. But as those landmarks pull the face towards, then this thing can start figuring out, oh, okay, this thing needs to be this color, this thing needs to be this color, these kind of things. So it naturally pulls, it starts ignoring the background pixels, because we're not even looking at background pixels. We're only looking at the pixels that the vertex projects to on the image.
Yeah, it's not over the all the pixels. It's only over some of the points.
The number n.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I was wondering about this that wasn't clear to me is occlusion. If I turn my head like this, some of the ends are on the other side that you don't see. So I'm actually a little curious about that. Does the renderer do back face culling? Not sure. I'm not sure. And then finally, the regularization thing is that the standard deviation, our model of all these guys, and so there is a regularization weight that says don't take these values farther away from that. And this is a perfect place to stop, because now you have a concept of how they're solving for this, and take this, assume that this can be actually solved. Just think of this, they're solving for all those 261 parameters. And once they can render stuff. And one last thing the cool thing about this is once we've actually solved for all these parameters, we can render our character, but they render it in 3 different values. So first of all, it's rendering. So they render a representation of my face, and just my face, no background or anything, that looks like me, but it's from the CG character. Then they also render a UV map that represents where the parts of my face are in the image. So this is actually a UV map. And then finally, they render the eyes. They have a specific image of just where the eyes are pointing to make sure that the machine learning thing can grab onto the eyes and make sure that the eyes are pointing in the right direction. They actually render the eyes so that if my eyes blink, this goes black. And if they're open, it's and blue, the white sclera, and then the blue irises. And those eyes are control how the thing is pointing into the machine learning kind of stuff. So the fact that students do minimization? Yes, yes they do. The minimization takes a single for 20 milliseconds, right? It's just 670 milliseconds. And once you've figured out the identity, once you know that you're looking at a person, then the minimization, because the identity is a lot of this, the minimization goes down to 250 milliseconds. So a quarter of a second. What? The fact that that minimizes that fast just boggled my mind. I think it's because of landmark detection. All right, guys. Sorry for the bobble on starting everything up. We went a little long, but thank you. Bye. We're going to talk more in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. We'll be right back here, and we'll continue on with this paper.